It's nice seeing folks come here to learn more about Ammon Bundy and what he's trying to do for the state of Idaho. I'm Dan Babcock. I grew up out here. Jim or James Babcock's my father. And I moved out of here in 2000. I live over in the Mud Lake area now and operate a couple of businesses there. But, people like Ammon, I'm just grateful for people like him that are willing to stand up and fight for rights, and all the sacrifices he's done over the years, preserved his father's ranch and helped the Hammonds out of a life sentence in prison, and at least the old man, he wouldn't have lived for his sentence, how long they sentenced him. Anyway, I've watched Ammon for a lot of years, and I appreciate what he's done, and the strength and the courage he has, and I'm glad to see him running for governor, and I really hope he gets it. I'm glad to see you guys here supporting him. But anyway, my father was going to give an opening prayer, and then we'll let Ammon take it from there.
Father in heaven, we're thankful to be here this night to hear Ammon Bundy. Thankful for our great valley, thankful for our great country, thankful for our state. Help us to promote the right people in our government to help us maintain our constitutional rights and other things that we need. Thankful for all those that are here. Thankful that Ammon is here. Pray that the Spirit might be with him, the things that he has to say. These things we ask in the name of thy Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.
All right, thank you for being here. Look forward to our conversation, and I hope that's what it becomes, that we can talk and maybe get to understand each other's thoughts a little bit more, and talk about what is happening around us and what is important, and even more important, what it is that we need to do and how to act. Because I'm a strong believer that if you do not become a person who acts, then you become someone who is acted upon. And I just think that those are eternal principles, and none of us made the rules. So I think we are in a situation where we have the opportunity to act, so that we don't just become a bunch of people that are just acted upon. So with that, let's get started here. I got quite a few things I want you to consider, but right off the bat, I think I want to try to lay a foundation here of a definition of something, and something that I had to ponder myself for a while. Can everybody see that okay? Am I in your way? Is that going to be okay for everybody? This way, that way. This way, probably this way. Okay, I'll have to go to my computer once in a while. So, anyway, what is freedom? And so I ask you that, because I have to admit that before I was impacted with the things that happened to my family and mostly that, I hadn't considered it. Like actually what the definition of it is. We sing about it, we celebrate it, we believe we send our military to defend it. We might feel it in our hearts, but what is it? So I'm asking you that. Anybody want to take a shot at it? Right here.
Responsibility.
Okay, responsibility. It is definitely responsibility. Anybody else? What is it? What is it to you? You don't have to be right or wrong, really.
The ability to choose.
Okay, the ability to choose. I think that's a huge part of freedom. Would you agree? Would everybody agree? The ability to be able to make your own choices, right? Any other thoughts? All right, so I'm going to give you what I believe today is the correct definition of freedom. And that is, freedom is the ability to do whatever you want, as long as you are not infringing upon another person's rights.
Amen.
Right? Be able to do whatever you want. So let's break that down a little bit. So, freedom to worship. So, to be able to worship whatever you want, as long as you're not infringing upon somebody else's right. That's now, if I decided I wanted to worship a yellow dog, and I mentioned this at one time in a previous town hall, and a guy said, well, you might get fleas, and I might get fleas, but when you have freedom, you have the right to do that. That doesn't mean that it's more, doesn't mean you're going to receive salvation over that, right? But you should have the right to worship whatever you want, as long as you're not infringing upon somebody else's right. That's what we believe about freedom. Freedom to own private property, meaning to do whatever you want to do with your property, as long as you do not infringe upon your neighbor's rights, right? Is that a right that's being taken? Do we have a right to do whatever we want on our property as long as we don't infringe upon our neighbors? It doesn't matter if all our neighbors don't care. We're still under that threat and control. And that is a right that is being lost. That is a freedom that's being lost. Freedom to publish our thoughts. What do they call that in the Bill of Rights? Freedom of the press, right? I thought, do we have somebody from media here, or media personnel right there? Well, welcome. So we enjoy that you have a right to come here to document your thoughts, whether you like me or anybody else at all in here, which I'm not saying you don't. And you get to publish that. And that's your right. And it's an important one. What about the freedom to travel? Is that a freedom that we should be able to enjoy? Be able to go wherever we want, as long as we're not infringing upon somebody else's rights. Freedom to trade with each other. This is to me, for whatever reason, I enjoy talking about this one. The freedom to trade with each other. What does that mean when I say the freedom to trade?
Barter.
To barter, to be in business, right? To be able to trade, or a service for something. And it takes two people to trade. A willing buyer and a willing seller. It doesn't take a government to involve itself in that for that to happen. And it shouldn't be a government trying to profit off of every transaction. That's not the way trade is supposed to be done. And we should be able to trade whatever we want, as long as we are not infringing upon our neighbor's rights or another's rights. As soon as we do infringe, then no longer is that our right. And same with freedom to worship. If we decided that we're going to do human sacrifices, and that's our right to worship, it's no longer freedom, correct? Because you can't cross that line. You have the right to do whatever you want, as long as you're not infringing upon another person's right. Same with your property, same with trade, same with freedom to raise and have children. Has that right been infringed upon before? Are there places right now on earth where that right is being infringed upon? Yeah. Has that threat come, what's that?
China.
China's one, right? Is that threat in any form coming closer and closer to our families? So what about the freedom to choose where you live? I can live wherever I want as long as I'm not infringing upon somebody else. Meaning I can't go and say, well, I really like your backyard. I want to live there, right?
It'd be a rough living.
That would be a rough living, right? We might not get along very well. And I don't have the freedom to do that. That's not freedom. I don't have the right to go in your backyard and say, this is where I want to live and I'm free so I can live there. But I should be able to choose where I want to live, what town I want to live in, what area I want to live in. I get to choose my neighbors. That's part of freedom. And freedom to speak out. What do they call that in the Bill of Rights? Freedom of speech, right? So, can we agree, on this definition of freedom? Does it seem pretty close to what you can adopt as the proper or correct definition of freedom? The ability to do whatever you want, as long as you are not infringing upon another person's right. Now, some of you may know that I was arrested and incarcerated in federal prisons for 2 years. I was never convicted of a crime. But I was in there for 2 years, and I went through 2 major federal trials. The federal government spent $100 million trying to prosecute my family. And half that time I was in solitary confinement because they have this little plan where if they can put you in such duress and your family in such duress, you'll take a plea deal. And so that was what was going on, and we were suffering in those conditions. And in the first trial, which was about 10 months in my incarceration, never once was I able to have any physical contact with my wife or children, not one time during that whole 2 years. They knew that's what would be so hard for my brothers and my father and I to endure, not being able to be with our family. And so we ended up in a trial, the first trial, because we went through 2 of them. And during the process, I decided I was going to take the witness stand. And I get up there, and I end up testifying on the witness stand for 3.5 days. Well, part of that, as some of you may know, you have to go through cross-examination, where the prosecutors, who are very skilled in their art of lawyercraft, in trying to cross you so that you will make a mistake or say something that you didn't intend to say or whatever in front of the jury. And so during this process, while they're cross-examining me, they said, Ammon believes that he could, and so they're trying to excite the jury and say, Ammon believes he could do whatever he wants. And they said, don't you, like that. And what did I say? Yes, I do believe I could do whatever I want, as long as I do not infringe upon my neighbor's rights. Because that's what freedom is. And the jury got it. And so it ended up being something that actually was very beneficial to, a piece that the jury understood. Because through the prosecutor's own attacks, the jury was able to understand what freedom was. And that I do believe I could do whatever I want. I believe that I can do whatever I want. I should have a right to do whatever I want, as long as I do not infringe upon my neighbor's rights. And that is a great responsibility. Now, where do these rights come from? Where does freedom come from? Where do these rights come from? They come from God, right? The Creator. He created this earth. He has the right to give them to us. And He's given them to all of us. And He's given us the responsibility with it. And so that is where they originated from. And what is the purpose of government? What do we read in the Declaration of Independence is the purpose of government? Is to secure these rights that came from God, right? To secure freedom, which encompasses all of these things and more, right? And government's sole purpose is to secure these rights, to make sure that we have a right to do whatever we want, as long as we do not infringe upon another person's right. And then as soon as we infringe upon somebody else's right, like I decide I'm gonna camp in your backyard, which might be fun for a couple days, but then after that, I'm sure I'd wear my welcome thin, right? So if I was to do that, then does the government have jurisdiction? Right? Let's say you say you gotta go, and I say no, and you cock your shotgun, and I cock my shotgun, and I'm in your backyard. Does the government now have jurisdiction? Does the government now have jurisdiction to be able to step in as a force? It does, right? That's what gives them the authority. Because in that case, I would be violating someone else's right. But before that, they have no authority to infringe upon my ability to do whatever I want. So those are important things to be able to understand as we go through this evening. And hopefully we can all at least somewhat agree upon those principles. Because it's pretty hard to move forward and participate in government and decide who you're going to support, decide what actions you're going to take in order to secure your own liberties, your own freedoms. It's pretty hard to do that if you don't understand what freedom is. So, any comments or questions or thoughts on that? Okay, you're gonna have to loosen up a little bit. We're in a little town. Yes, go ahead.
I'll say one thing. The freedoms are okay as long as you abide by the rules of God and rules of man. But that goes for both sides, the public and the government.
What happens if the rules of man begin to overstep the laws of God or these freedoms in which God has given us? What are we loyal to then?
That's when the people need to speak out and say how they feel.
Okay, I agree. All right, so I'm going to give you a little bit of background about myself. I'm going to go through it pretty quickly, but I do want you to understand who I am, what makes me tick. I'm trying to gain your confidence so that you can feel comfortable about supporting me. And so I grew up on a ranch in southern Nevada. It's a lot different from this area. We don't get hardly any snow. I think in 20 years maybe it snowed once and it was gone in a couple hours. Here's my parents, Clive and Carol Bundy. And I'm grateful for good parents that taught me how to think and right from wrong, and taught me how to work and to know when to compromise and know not when to compromise. And I'm grateful for good parents. Here's a little bit of a picture of the ranch. You can see there's not a lot of vegetation, but it's a beautiful country. And I still have, that desire to always go to the ranch. My dad runs about 700 head of cattle over a large area, and this is what they eat. So, they'll eat the grass underneath the brush there. Certain times of the year, those Joshua trees will get pears on them, and they'll eat that. And they'll actually get fat from time to time. And we really, need rain and need it to rain in order to, just grow the little grass that they rely on. To kind of give you an idea, it takes about 100 acres to produce enough feed for one cow. So it takes a large area to produce enough feed for enough cattle to be able to make a living for one family. And it's a lot of work, and it's not easy. And it's something that my dad enjoys, and my family has done now for 5 generations in that area. And since 1877. In fact, I tell this story that, and it is a true story, but the first group of people that went into that area were sent by Brigham Young out of Salt Lake, sent them down there, and then they came back less than a year later, and it was because it was so hot, so arid, and they came back and reported to Brigham Young that the place was uninhabitable, that there's no way people could live there. And so we joked that Brigham Young started looking all over and said that, started looking for the most ornery, hard-headed, obstinate people he could find, and he found my family and sent us down there. And we've been there ever since. And my dad is a producer. He believes that it is his duty to produce a commodity for the American people. And what is that commodity? Red meat. That's what he produces. And that's what my grandfather produced, that's what my great-grandfather produced, and my great-great-grandfather produced. And before that, they were farmers in Nebraska. And so that basically is the history of how we ended up at the ranch or how long we've been there. This is a scene here that I grew up, branding calves and working calves and cattle. You'll see that stockade corral. That's a pretty common corral in that area, made out of cedar posts. And it's one of the corrals that'll hold up and still contain those wild cattle. This is a scene that's not too unfamiliar. My little sister getting off the bus. She's met with 4 dogs and a baby calf. And that calf was survived. His mother got hit on the road. My dad did an emergency C-section and saved the calf. And the mother died. And that calf ended up being a really nice bull. That's where I'm from. That's who I am. That's part of the blood that I have in me. And I long to go back to the ranch. I love to go visit. My children love to go visit. And when they do, we'll go down there for like a week, a couple times a year, and I won't even see my kids. They're just gone the whole time. They're up in the hills or down on the river, and they just disappear the whole time they're there. And it's a great blessing to be able to live under those circumstances, outside of the city, outside of the town, and to be able to enjoy life in that way. And I think it's part of the reason why I value freedom so much, because I have experienced it in such a rich manner. So after, when I was about 15 years old, my dad came to me and said, "Well, son, the ranch isn't big enough for the both of us." And it was his way of expressing that the ranch just wasn't going to produce enough living for more than a couple families. And he had a whole bunch of kids. I was right in the middle. And he's pretty much telling me that you got to go find another living somewhere. And so before I did that, I did serve a mission for the Church of Jesus Christ, Latter-day Saints in Minnesota, and enjoyed that time. I feel that time is a sacred time for me, because it took me out of that, that life of living on the ranch and kind of all of that freedom that I had, and took me into a more refined, kind of structured environment, but also allowed me time to really find out whether I believed in the Lord Jesus Christ or not, and whether I wanted to put Him first above my own interests. And I was able to come to the conclusion before the end of my mission that that's what I wanted to do, that I wanted to do a lot of things, but more than anything, I wanted to serve the Lord and honor Him and all that He has done. So after that, I went to Southern Utah University in Cedar City, Utah. Went to a little school there, and then I started a business. And I kept wondering why I'm there, because my business was kind of taking me to other areas. There wasn't really a great customer base in Cedar City. But I ended up staying there for 6 years. And the reason I stayed there is because I was waiting for somebody, and I was waiting for my wife to finally come along. And and she finally showed up. And I scooped her up really fast, and we dated for a little while, and then we got married, and shortly after that we moved to Arizona. And I took my business down there, and we started life and started having kids, and now we have 6 kids. I got 3 boys, 3 girls. My littlest is right there. I also started a fleet maintenance business where I managed and maintained commercial trucks. And that I built that business up for 21 years, and it ended up being one of the largest private fleet maintenance companies in Arizona. And so I say that. Why do I want to say that to you? I want you to understand that I've managed hundreds of people. I've had to hire and fire hundreds of people, deal with budgets of millions of dollars of budgets, and build and organize people in a way that we could come together and accomplish things as a team. And I want you to know that I've done that. And I did it from scratch, and I built it up, and I had quite a few employees for many years, and built up a really nice business in the Phoenix, Arizona area. And also around 17 or so years into this, I began to see a need for a software for this industry, because there just wasn't anything. There wasn't any really software. We were using like 4 or 5 different softwares to try to operate our business. And I kept looking multiple times throughout the whole time I was in business. I kept looking for a software that would help me manage my the maintenance on all the vehicles, and my technicians, and the finances, and all that. And there wasn't anything there. So my dad taught me, when you can't find a job in the United States of America, then you make your job, right? And I believed that I had the resources and so forth to be able to make my own software. And so I did. I put a team together, and it took us about 3.5, almost 4 years to do it. And we built a fleet maintenance shop management software that now is one of the leading fleet maintenance shop management softwares in North America. And since then, I sold both those businesses. I sold them, and 7 years ago, I moved to Idaho 7 years ago, and once I was here, I ended up selling them because I didn't want to manage them remotely, and I was in the middle of two of those years I was spent in federal prison, and so I ended up selling them. And now, like I said, now I'm in Emmett, Idaho, and I love it there. I won't get into too much about what happened to my family, but just to kind of sum it up, after 136 years in 2014, meaning 136 years my family had been on that ranch and in that area. The federal government come in and said that the ranch belonged to them, and that we were no longer allowed to ranch. And my dad went through a whole series of legal battles with them, and trying to explain our rights. We have 11 deeds deeded with the state of Nevada that are grazing rights connected to our livestock watering rights, and these deeds are real property. And the federal government just wanted to completely disregard that those even existed. And they basically demanded that my father, stop ranching and give up the ranch, and my dad wouldn't. And so they sent an army of 213 federal agents and surrounded my family's home. Snipers on the hills began to threaten my family that if we resisted in any way, that this would be another Ruby Ridge or Waco. And it became a very, very serious situation. And ultimately, the American people responded. And, there's a little step in between there, because we had something called social media, Facebook, And we were able to film them, and other people all across the country were able to see it. And they were not okay with what the federal government was doing, and they came to the defense of my family. And I watched, I'll show you just a couple little things here. I watched get it here. Oh yeah, I apologize, I got it over here a little bit. I watched, people after a full, week of abuse and threat, I watched the American people come together and stand against what was happening, and ultimately give these federal agents an ultimatum. And they chose to leave. And here's a picture of one of the federal vehicles, and you can see all the vehicles behind him. And he has that and more in front of him, because he's parked in this line, and the line goes all the way up, winds all the way up to this freeway right here. And they decided, because the American people told them that they needed to leave and were standing in unity enough so that they needed to leave, that within an hour they got all of these vehicles and they left the area. And my family went back to ranching. Now that wasn't the end of the story, but that gives you a little bit of a background of what happened. So before I move on, because we're going to talk about Idaho. We're going to spend the rest of the time talking about Idaho. But I want to answer any questions that anybody might have about, what happened at the ranch in 2014, with my family situation, what happened in Malheur in 2016, where we stood with the Hammonds, or for the Hammonds. I want to answer any of those questions. I'm open to answering any of those. And so now is the time. Maybe you don't. Maybe you want to get some clarification about something. Maybe you don't know about something. So maybe you're just fine with the way I explained it and we move on. But now would be the time to, yes.
So why did the federal government feel like they could come in there and go out after the rest?
So, much like here, except it's even worse in Nevada, 89% of Nevada is controlled by the federal government. They claim that they own the land and the resources. Well, the problem is with that is, one, is it's unconstitutional. There is no authority that allows for the federal government to come in and own mass amounts of land inside a state. It's supposed to be under the state jurisdiction and belong to the people. But setting that aside, they have claimed it, but the problem is that many of the ranchers and miners and even loggers have had deeds, had rights such as, and when I say rights, I'm talking about, like in my family's case, an actual deeds with the state of Nevada, that deeded with the state of Nevada, that declares that we own the livestock watering rights and the right to graze around it. And it even lists how many cattle are typically grazed in that area. And these deeds go all the way back to, well, some of them go all the way, they originate from all the way to 1850s. But Nevada didn't have a way to register them until 1890. And my family owns 11 of these. And we've owned them since we were able to claim them with the state of Nevada. Well, the federal government just wants to disregard that we have any rights to the land. And they want to say that, they're the federal government, that they didn't dispose of this land, that Nevada's not even really a state, or not the land that they're claiming is not jurisdiction of Nevada. And my family and others have fought that battle for multiple generations. And ultimately it come down to my dad just saying no. Because we went through 20 years of federal garbage in federal courts. And my father describes it this way, and I think it's great, because he says, going into a federal court with federal federal lawyers, a federal judge, federal rules and regulations, federal agencies, going into a federal court is like a man who comes into your house and beats up your wife and children. And so you try to get justice and you take them to court and they say, all arise for the honorable judge, and a man walks in a black robe and it's the very man that beat up your wife and children. He goes, that's what it's like trying to get justice in a federal court. And so ultimately my dad said, no, I have these are mine, these are my rights, these are my deeds, and I'm not going to yield them. This is my heritage, my ranch, and I'm not going to yield. And they said, well, we don't care. We're going to take it. We're going to take it by force if we have to. And so that's what created that circumstance. That's the situation, you know, whether someone likes it or not, that's the circumstance that created that situation. So, any other questions? Yeah.
Was the Hammonds the same situation?
The Hammonds was very, very, very close to the same situation, where they had private property, a large amount of private property, and then they had grazing rights around the areas as well. And the refuge that was controlled by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the federal government, had been buying up or taking all these ranches, and they had now come up all around the Hammonds, and they wanted the Hammonds Ranch. And so they were using all kinds of mechanisms to try to get the Hammonds to give it up or to abandon it or to sell it even. Well, the Hammonds didn't want to. And so one of the mechanisms that they ended up using that was very effective upon them was the mechanism of prosecution. And they found a way to prosecute them under statutes that were never to be used that way. And it was an effort to try to take the Hammonds Ranch. And after we had experienced what we had experienced at our ranch, and my father's ranch, I felt like we needed to go help these people. That we hadn't, not only, I have to admit, at first I did not want anything to do with it. I just wanted kind of my life back because we really got thrown into the public light. None of my family wanted that. But, you know, after some urging by the Spirit of the Lord, I knew and understood that I was supposed to go and help the Hammond family. And so I did that. I did the best I could. And ultimately, what it resulted in, even though it came with a heavy price, what it resulted in was the Hammonds, let me show you something here. The Hammond family, the father and the son, were ultimately freed from prison, and President Trump pardoned them. And they went home to their families. And I thank President Trump for that, and I feel that it was worth it. Even though we paid a heavy, heavy price for it, I feel it was worth it. And in fact, out of only 17 presidential pardons by President Trump, 3 of them I advocated for. And so, and I know that President Trump would have never known about them or even understood the situation if we had not gone and done what we did. And so I consider that a success. Any other questions or thoughts about that before we get into this other part? Okay. All right. Oh, go ahead, Ray.
What was the state's? Did the state come in and want to help or do anything, or did they just sit back and say, okay, fans, do what you want?
That's a really, really good question. Why would I say that's such a good question?
The state's supposed to defend your rights.
That's right. It's the state's duty to protect the people's rights against the federal government. That's the entire purpose. The federal government is supposed to defend the states against the outside world, and the states are supposed to defend the people's rights against anybody who comes, including the federal government. And so that's a great question. Where was the state? And ultimately what happened is both the county sheriff, who's one of the most powerful sheriffs in the country, and why I say that is because he has, in Clark County, it's one of the largest counties in the country, and they operate the Las Vegas the Las Vegas doesn't have its own police department, it is the sheriff's. So he has 1,800 deputies. Okay, so, I mean, he's a very powerful individual with a lot of power to be able to protect and defend the people. But him and the governor chose to take what they called a neutral position. Well, it's not a neutral position when you have the federal government coming after a little ranching family. I'm a witness of that. It is not not a neutral position. That's like saying that you have a pedophile. I hate to use this example, but it is a good one. And you got a child, and the parent says, well, I'm going to take a neutral position. That's not a neutral position. And the parent's duty, just as it is to the state's and the county sheriff's duty, is to stand in defense and protect that child or whatever it might be. And that didn't happen. And why did they take the neutral position? I bet you can guess. Yeah. Because they have received so much money from the federal government. And when they receive money from the federal government doesn't just give it to them and say, go do what you want with it. What does the federal government do? They make them, that's right, they control it. They make the state and the county sheriffs and the commissioners and the cities and anybody else, the corporations and anybody else, the churches, they make them sign what typically is called an MOU, a Memorandum of Understanding. And in those memorandums, there's some general terminology. And that is that they will comply to the rules and conditions in which the federal government places upon them. And it is a way that we are losing our ability. We're losing this defense that's supposed to be there for us. It's a real problem that we have, and we're going to talk a little bit more about it. So, the governor wasn't going to, bite the hand that's giving them all these millions and millions of dollars, and neither was the sheriff. And so the Bundy family had to defend ourselves, ultimately, and we couldn't do it alone. The best we could do is just show the American people what was going on there, and thankfully, they responded. Otherwise, I would not be alive to be standing here today. I am certain of that. They would have taken our lives. So, any others?
During that time, I can't believe it's been 20 years ago, but during that time, it was brought up by the news media of your dad's refusal to pay the grazing permits on that. And it seemed like he claimed he wanted to pay the state rather than can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, so what ultimately happened was, it's a long history, but we go back to, I'll try to sum it up into really tight, but you gotta go back to 1934, the Taylor Grazing Act. That's when the federal government came in and said, all these ranchers were some of them were in conflict, some of them were basically ranching, but none of their borders were defined. So they were overlapping each other and they were having some troubles. And rather than the state doing it, which should have been their responsibility, the federal government came in and said, well, we're going to draw boundaries and work with the ranchers and get these boundaries set. Well, once they did that, and they got the ranchers together and they all kind of defined this happened all over the West. All over the West. This didn't just happen in Nevada, but happened all over the West. And ultimately, the ranchers did all somewhat agree, and they decide, just end up having their boundaries to their ranches. But the federal government decided to go a step further. And remember, when we're talking about the federal government, back then we're talking about the land office and the grazing board. Now, what was the purpose of the land office, the federal land office? Anybody know? It was to get the land and the resources into the people's hands. That was their whole purpose, to get the people using the land and the resources. That was the whole design. And what was the purpose of the grazing board, the U.S. Grazing Board? It was to get ranchers out there grazing and using the land and claiming the land for grazing. So that's kind of how they got involved. And at this point, it should have been the state, but the federal government did it. And then they said, well, let's put together a joint fund where the ranchers will pay so much per cow. They call it an AUM, right? They still call it. And it'll go into what they call an improvement fund. And then the ranchers can take that and they'll decide themselves in the board. They'll decide how they're going to use it, but they need to use it for improvements like fences. So they can make fences and they can make some roads and they can also put some water troughs and some improvements. That's what it was for. And that, for all the ranchers or anybody who understands, that over years became deteriorated and perverted until now it became what we call a grazing permit. And it was never, ever intended to be used the way it is now. The federal government and those ranchers knew that that was their ranch. They had rights to those ranches. But through this process and generational gaps, the federal government began to claim it. And then say, now you've got to sign a permit and we're leasing it to you. And that was a process that happened over about 2.5 generations. Well, so to answer your question, at the Bundy Ranch, that same thing happened. But then the federal government comes down in the late 1980s and says to my dad, we're going to close your allotment because we want to make it an endangered species mitigation area for the desert tortoise. We're going to close it, so no longer can you ranch there. And my dad's going, wait a minute. I mean, I have these deeds. It's been in my family longer than 70 years longer than the Bureau of Land Management even existed. And other ranches, the same things are happening to other ranchers in that area. And they're starting to go, well, what's going on here? Like, where are our rights? And that's where they began to research and understand of what happened and unwind what happened. And so at some point, my dad, it was right around 1990, right around in that time, he begins to make a stand. And he says, look, if I'm going to pay somebody to use my ranch, I'm certainly not going to pay the federal government. They do not have jurisdiction or authority to hear. He goes, so if there's some public entity that I'm supposed to pay to use my ranch and my rights, then I'll pay the county. That's the closest government. And so he took the exact same amount that he would pay for, I think, a 10-year period, and he paid it to the county. And the county actually took it, deposited it, and then they realized what he's doing, and they're like, we don't know what to do with this money. And then that's when my dad took a stand. He said, this ranch is my ranch. But the thing is there was no grazing fee because they'd already closed the allotment. So the grazing fee and not paying that was actually a lie that the media spun. Because according to the federal government, the allotment was already closed. So does that answer your question? I know there's a lot. I packed 3 generations of stuff in that explanation.
How did you continue grazing it then if it wasn't a permit anymore?
We put our cows on there and they ate the grass.
That's what I thought.
And my dad had a right to do that. How do you explain the deeds, the grazing right deeds of the state of Nevada? That's where the conflict came in. Because we have those just kind of to explain those deeds. And my dad's done this before. You can sell them, you could trade them, you can go to the bank and borrow money on them, as collateral, and you can inherit them. They are real property. And the federal government wanted to act like they weren't. And in fact, what they were trying to do and what they have done to almost all the land users in the West is they have taken the rights of the people to the land and to the resources and transferred them into a privilege. They claim that they own it and they only give you a privilege to use it. Well, if you go to almost any ranch, any allotment, if you will, I can go show you where the original rights to graze are tied to a certain property or a certain water. Those are deeded rights that the federal government took from us. And what does it matter? Like, how does it correlate to us here? To each one of you. Because what are they doing now? Let's just look at COVID, the whole COVID 2020 thing, right? They want to claim that your right to your body, your right to your decisions, is not your right, it's your privilege, and they get to say it. It's the exact same thing. They get to decide. And you just have to comply because it's your privilege. And so the very same things that have been happening to my family for a couple of generations are now being experienced by all the people across really the world. And it is a battle that we are fighting. We have to answer to ourselves first, and then we have to make it very clear to anybody else that our bodies, our ability to choose, those things belong to us. They don't belong to anybody else. And so that's the battle that we're fighting. All right. Wait a minute. I had one more. There was one more question, right? Or no, did I? All right, yeah. And then I got to get onto this. We've got to get into this.
How bad was the year of confinement?
So I spent 2 years in federal prison, but I spent right around a year in solitary confinement. And it's basically a 7x10 concrete box. And you don't talk to anybody. You don't see the light of day. About the most interaction you have with an individual, another person, is them pushing the food tray through the food port. And it's a very, very difficult time. And it was something that I wouldn't wish on anybody, but also I have to say and admit that the growth and the spiritual closeness that I felt with God probably couldn't have happened anywhere else. And so in that aspect, I'm grateful for that opportunity. And people have asked, my family and I, because they threw my brothers, my dad, all of us in there, friends, and they threw us in there, and we had to endure that. And they've asked, how did you not get bitter? And which is I think a reasonable question to ask. And the answer to that is you have to forgive right pretty much at the moment after they have done what they've done to you. Because there's many times where, terrible things were done to us, and you have to keep forgiving, and keep forgiving again and again and again. Otherwise, you harbor that bitterness, and it turns into hate. And that is basically what would destroy you in a place like solitary confinement. So, thank you.
Sir?
Yeah.
How did this government justify putting you in solitary confinement? I don't understand that.
In jail or in solitary confinement?
Solitary confinement, that's worse than jail, isn't it?
Well, yeah,
Is that worse
but
than
the justification is the same. How do you take someone who's never been convicted of a crime, never been convicted of even a misdemeanor, and how can I stand here and say I spent 2 years in federal prison? In fact, last Sunday in Sunday class, I started a comment that I was making. I said I spent 2 years in federal prison. A lot of people, and I never explained myself. But imagine what a lot of people were thinking in the room. Well, he had to have deserved it, he must have committed a terrible crime in federal prison. And yet I was never even convicted of even a misdemeanor. And so that's part of why I'm here. I'm telling you, things are messed up. I'm an example of it.
Yeah, they done it so that the word will not get across to the world.
Yeah, that's part of it, but there's I can tell you there's a whole bunch of people right now spending time in a federal prison that don't design, or other prisons that have never been convicted of even a misdemeanor. Did you know that right now, in Idaho, they have suspended jury trials? Whatever reason, yes, but whatever reason. There is no justification. And they've done it, they did it most of 2020 and most of 2021. Suspended jury trials. That's one of the protected rights in the Bill of Rights. The right to a speedy trial. Yet here in Idaho, we've suspended jury trials. So imagine, in my situation, I can't quite imagine, as terrible as it was. Because if they would have convicted us, the minimum sentencing was 106 years for us, for each one of us. For myself, my father. They were trying to take our life away. Imagine, and we believe that if we could get in front of a jury and tell them the truth, that they would allow us to go home. And ultimately that's what happened. Imagine being stuck in prison right now, and they've suspended jury trials indefinitely. And you've got a little family out there. You've got little kids. My son wasn't even 1 year old when they took me, and I came home on his 3-year-old birthday. I'll never get that time back. But imagine being in prison, knowing you're innocent, wanting to plead your case to a jury, and you can't even get there because of some, I don't know, health reason. And that's why our founders put in the Bill of Rights that a person has a right to a speedy trial, because they understood that the government gets it wrong, becomes political, abuses the people. And so they set these things in there to make sure that what's happening right here in Idaho doesn't happen. Yet it's happening. There's I've heard figures of 400 cases that are awaiting trial right now in Idaho. So, anyway, I don't know how good of an
Is it state
answer.
or federal courts?
What's that?
Is it state and federal courts, both?
I don't know where the federal courts are,
The federal state courts.
but I know the state has suspended jury trials. And I just can't imagine being in that circumstance when you're incarcerated, and you need to get back with your family, and you believe that you can find justice if you can get it from a jury. And ultimately, what does it do? It causes a person to lose hope, so they take a plea deal, and they admit to something they didn't actually do. And the state wins. And it's not the way it's supposed to be. And it's going to take you and I correcting these things, because a great injustice is happening. All right. So, I'm going to talk some more about some of this stuff. So, I'm just preparing you, because it's not just jury trials. Because Idaho right now is in a battle for its conservative soul. And when I say battle, I really mean a battle. And a lot of it is because of this man right here and his buddies. And they've had a terrible hold on Idaho for about 4 decades now. Idaho has been the first in a few things that we shouldn't be too proud of. We were the first state to arrest people for attending church. This was always trust in chariots and others trust in horses, but we recall the Lord. This is a pastor who organized a church service in a parking lot. He was arrested for doing so. Idaho was also the first state to arrest some other for going to the park in Meridian. Remember that?
Was this because of the COVID?
Yeah.
Bullshit.
Idaho was also one of the first states to raid businesses for not shutting down. In fact, in Ketchum, Idaho. So the question has to be asked, why are police acting this way? Why are they acting this way? Well, this guy right here, this is in Hardware Brewing Company, and this is an undercover Idaho State Police officer, and he tells us why they're doing it. They're issuing a citation or I guess it's a citation, order to close. They're issuing it to these owners because they refused to close during COVID. Listen to what he says.
Real quick, this is from the state.
Would you say that again, sir? Hand him that letter back.
Now,
I would like to hear him identify himself again.
I'm Jim Schwecken with the Idaho State Police. I'm just delivering this letter in response to you guys opening it, in contrast to the stay-at-home order.
So did you hear that? He says, I'm delivering this letter, which is basically a letter from Idaho State Police demanding that they close their facility. And he says, I'm delivering this in reference to the governor's stay-at-home order. Okay? Now, a few days later, ISP raided the business and began prosecuting the owners. And so, again, why did they do this? They did it because of this man's orders. That's why they did it. In fact, who remembers what the stay-at-home order from Governor Little said in it? What did it say? Do you remember? Anybody? It said basically that all residents have to stay in their home. And then it lists the exception. There's only exception. So you could come out if we give you permission for this, and for this, and for this, right? Well, one of the exceptions was not having church. So what happens in Moscow, Idaho? They arrest the pastor for organizing a church outside in a parking lot. One of the exceptions was not taking your kids to the park. So what happened in Meridian, Idaho? They arrest a mother for taking her kids to the park. And one of them was you can open a restaurant. You can open up a restaurant. So what do? They go in and raid and shut down and began to prosecute the owners of the restaurant. So it was his orders. It was Governor Little's orders. Now, some of you, I hope not, but if you do, I'll give you that, might be saying, well, but there was a pandemic going on, right? There was a terrible, terrible cycle of death that was just sweeping across Idaho. And so the governor had to do something, right? So who can remember when Governor Little first put the state of Idaho in emergency status? Anybody remember? It was in 2020, right? It was in March, and it was March 13th. Well, let's answer the question. Let's go. I'm going to show you some evidence here, and I'm going to, you answer for yourself whether you think that Governor Little did this to protect the health and safety of the people of Idaho, or if he did it for another reason. Because on March 13th, the same day that Governor Little issued his emergency order and put the state of Idaho in emergency status, March 13th. Well, it was the same day that President Trump held a press conference announcing that he was releasing $50 billion in federal funds to states in emergency status. Okay? So in order to get part of this $50 billion, the state had to be in emergency status. Well, again, maybe we really were in emergency status. But the problem with that is the governor on his own website said that on Friday, March 13th, that there was only one confirmed case, COVID case. So we have one confirmed COVID case, and the state or the governor puts the state of Idaho in emergency status, and it just so happens to be the same day that President Trump says there's $50 billion available if the state is in emergency status. So now, let's go on. Who remembers when Governor Little put us in the extreme state of emergency? It was a few days later, on March 25th. Well, interesting enough, March 25th, Trump again announced with Speaker Nancy Pelosi that the federal government was going to release $2 trillion for states that were in extreme emergency status. The same day he puts Idaho in extreme emergency status. And at that time, there was a news report that said that we had 136 unconfirmed COVID cases. Well, we're a state of 1.8 million people. And we're putting the state, all the people of Idaho, ordering them to stay home in their homes and to not come out unless he gives us permission, putting us in extreme state of emergency because 136 people might have tested positive for a virus that they didn't know anything about. So, you see a problem here? Now, but Governor Little, he wasn't shy about expressing what he was doing. So in his orders, he begins to express why he's doing what he's doing. And right here it says, and securing millions of dollars in funds. And he talks about putting the state in an emergency order and then extreme agency order. And then remember this right here, this section 46601. Because that's the Idaho code that he says he had authority to do what he did. So remember that, section 46601. So here's where he thanks President Trump for $1.25 billion, and he's saying basically that, you know, Congress is going to give us more. That's a letter official letter from his office. And now here's an executive order, 2020-07. I believe that it was the 7th order in 2020. Makes sense, right? And it says here, the title, establishing a process to evaluate and implement federal coronavirus funding. So they're getting all this money, right? He starts to tell us, whereas I issued a proclamation on March 13th, declaring a state of emergency. Whereas I issued a proclamation on March 25th, declaring a state of extreme emergency in the state of Idaho. And he says, whereas Congress has passed and President Trump has signed 3 legislative packages that provide state funding in response to COVID-19. And he says, whereas I anticipate additional congressional actions on federal relief packages to state regarding COVID-19. So he's telling us what he's doing. Put us in state of emergency, he's going to get all this money, and he's expecting more money. And then he says right here, this is the next page, now therefore I, Brad Little, Governor of the state of Idaho, do hereby order the creation of a COVID-19 financial advisory committee, comprising of members appointed by and serving at the pleasure of the governor. So he's getting all this money, and he's going to get his buddies, his closest buddies here, that he says that he appoints, and they together, and they have to serve on this committee at his pleasure. And then they together are going to decide how they're going to spend these funds. So, do you see a problem with this? And I'm showing you his own orders. I'm not making this up. This isn't me because I'm running against Governor Little. I'm going to throw a bunch of mud at him. I am showing you his own words. He's saying he's going to receive billions of dollars, and he had already received billions of dollars. Now he's going to create a committee of him and his buddies, and they serve him at his pleasure, and they decide how they're going to spend the money. Now, this is the last page of this order. He says, for the coronavirus relief funds and other funds to be administered by the office of the governor. So he says, all these funds, we're going to decide, and we're going to administer them by the office from the office of the governor. How are states' funds supposed to be administered? Who's supposed to administer state funds? The legislature, our representatives, right? We elect them in our local areas, we send them up to there, and collectively, they're supposed to decide where the funds of the state go and how they're spent. Why? So that one person or a small group of people don't get control of it and start to use it for their own purposes, power, and benefit. It's the whole purpose, the whole reason why the legislature is supposed to administer the state funds. But what has he done here?
Became a dictator.
He usurped that. He made himself, in this state, a dictator, where he receives the funds, and then he is the one that distributes it with him and his buddies. And don't forget that they serve at his pleasure. He appointed them, and they serve at his pleasure. And they decide. Now, maybe we shouldn't get too concerned about this, because at this point, it's only $18 billion.
What was that all?
$18 billion is how much he has received from the federal government that we know of, that has come directly from the federal government to the office of the governor, and him and his buddies have decided how to spend. That's over 2 times the annual state budget. And he has made it so that he gets to distribute these funds, basically spend these funds between him and his buddies.
How much was he paying his buddies?
Well, that's a good
He
question,
must have been-
and I can't answer you for sure. But, I got, we have followed this loop though, where he's appointed individuals over a certain, board or an agency or so forth, and he's appointed these people over this, right? He's increased their budgets and their funds through this, right? And then in return, those very same people have donated back to his campaign in the full amounts that they can. So, it's all legal. It's all legal. But that's what's happening right now. So, like someone like me, we've raised for my campaign, which I could be more ecstatic about, more grateful. We've raised about $320,000, which is a lot of money. He hasn't even announced, and he has over $1 million donated to his campaign already. And it's been done through a lot of the means this way. He's pushed so much money. In fact, they've got so much money they don't know what to do with it. How many of you heard in Idaho that Idaho has a surplus?
Yeah.
Well, how do you have a surplus of $1.5 billion when you've taken $18 billion from the federal government? How is that fiscally, not really responsible, but how is it even possible? But he's fabricated this surplus so that he can dupe the people of Idaho to thinking that he's such a great person and he's been so responsible with the state's funds that there's a surplus left over, and then he's actually sending people checks. And it is a political ploy, and the reason that they can do that is because he's received so much money from the federal government. They literally have so much money. Just his office alone has received over 2 times the Idaho State annual budget. Okay? All right. So now, if that was all, I would be, mad still, but I wouldn't be as mad as what I'm going to show you here in just a little bit. Do you have a question?
I was just wondering, if you've got a surplus of 1.8 billion, and you took in 18 billion, where the hell is the rest of it?
Well,
come on.
ask his buddies that serve at his pleasure.
Jesus Christ.
Well, yeah. Good question. So now, let's go on here, because remember that statute I showed you, 46601? Yeah, go ahead.
What did the legislature, obviously you usurped it from them, did they do anything?
Okay, yeah, let me back up. I gotta check my clock. Okay. I don't wanna keep you guys too long, but we got still material. But that's a great question, right? What's the legislature doing about it? I mean, he usurped their power, right? Clearly usurped their power, and the legislature, the legislative branch, the executive branch, and the judicial branch are all supposed to be equal branches of government, right? So you'd think that the legislative branch would say, hey, governor, you can't do that. That's not, you're not supposed to do that. So what did the legislature do? Because I'm not very happy with the legislature, right? So what did they do? Well, the law, you know what? I'm going to wrap that up, but I'm going to wrap it up after, because there's another issue that I'm going to explain here, and I'm going to explain that the same solution that the legislatures were supposed to use should have been used for this problem too. So let me go through that. But I will, what's that?
You were wondering where the money went.
Yeah, so remember that question, because that's a great question. Why didn't the legislature? But I'm also gonna go through something else here, and then I'll answer both of them, okay? So let's, you remember that order that I was telling you about? Or that statute, 46601? This is the authority that the governor said he used. And notice this, Title 46, Chapter 6, Militia and Military Affairs, Martial Law and Active Duty, 46601, authority of the governor. Now let's jump down to 2. This is what he enacted. He used this power to basically do what he has done in Idaho. He said, during a period of state of extreme emergency, the governor shall have complete authority over all agencies of the state government, including all separate boards and commissions, and the right to exercise all policing power vested in the state. So what did he do by enacting this?
Declared martial law.
He did, and he took the authority over all agencies of state government, including all separate boards and commissions, and all policing power vested in the state. So now he exercises these powers that have never been exercised before in Idaho, ever. He exercises them, and he gives himself full authority over all the government of Idaho and all the policing agencies. And then he took all this money from the federal government and he took it directly into the office of the governor. And now he has all this money and all this power to do whatever he wants. Whatever he wants. Now this is not me saying that. Am I reading it wrong? This is what he did. He declared under 46601 these powers. And he took those powers.
How long can he use these powers?
That's a great question. But before I answer that, I'm going to answer those together. What do we call that when one branch of government or one person takes up all the powers to themselves? It's a dictatorship, right? That's a complete different form of government. We don't have dictatorships in the United States of America. We don't believe in dictatorships. They're not appropriate. They're not a representative government. And in fact, in Article 4, Section 4 of the U.S. Constitution, it said, get to it. Oh, I thought I had it. It says that here we go. The United States shall guarantee to every state in the Union a Republican form of government. What's a Republican form of government? Representative government, right? A government of the people, by the people, and for the people. It is what some call a free government, because it's the people being able to express their freedoms and the government just protecting those. And so whose duty is it? Whose duty by the Constitution is it to stop any person, any governor, anybody else from forming a different type of government? It's the duty of the United States government, right? And the founders recognized that that possibly might happen. And therefore they said that the United States shall guarantee to every state in the Union a Republican form of government. But do we think Sleepy Joe's going to come down and correct old Brad Little? No, they like each other, right? Remember how he spoke good about Brad Little? So the federal government's not going to come straighten this out. And Governor Little has taken this power unto himself, and he has all the funding and all the power vested in the state, according to him, all under his control. And has put the people of Idaho in a very precarious situation. And that's why we saw what we saw in 2020. With people being arrested for going to church, people arrested for traveling, people arrested for taking their children to the park, businesses raided. That's why. That's why, because that's what he did. Now, thank goodness, here's actually the order. I'll just read the first line. This order directs all individuals living in the state of Idaho to self-isolate at their place of residence. And go down here, directing all businesses and government agencies to cease non-essential operations at physical locations in the state of Idaho, prohibiting all non-essential gatherings of any number of individuals, ordering the cessation of all non-essential travel. Well, I don't know about you, but if I have a business, and that business is what pays for my home, my children's food, my children's clothing, then it's pretty essential to me. And for him to come along and say, well, you're essential, you're not, you're essential, you're not, and do it under basically the ruling powers that he took all into himself, well, personally, I'm not okay with that. I'm not okay with that. Now, thank goodness, though, that the order's over, right? That all the emergency orders are over, right? We're all okay? One of his first, it might have been his first proclamation in this year, January 7th, 2020, he wanted to make sure that all the people of Idaho understood that we're still under emergency status. That the state of Idaho is still under emergency order. He wanted to make sure that, so he made a proclamation on January 7th, 2020, just not very many days ago. Or excuse me, thank you. 2022, January 7th, 2022, not very many days ago. All right, so we're all good, right? So we don't have to worry about it. No, we are still under these controls. And he is still taking these powers unto himself. And so we have to ask, what do the people of Idaho do? And I'm going to answer your question, and then I'm going to have you tell me what the people of Idaho need to do. But first, you asked, and you said, well, how long can he hold that power? And you asked, what did the legislature do? I'm going to answer that in the same answer. Because this emergency power is in the state statute. So if there was like an invasion or something very serious, the governor can assemble and get the power he needs quickly to be able to protect the life, liberty, and property of the people of Idaho. But it has a limit. It has a limit. And even has a time limit. And that time limit is 30 days. And if it's an extreme state, which he did declare extreme state of emergency because, we had 136 cases, right? Unconfirmed cases. So he declared it extreme. Then it says in the statute that he can extend it for another 30 days. However, the Idaho law is a good law, and it says that if he doesn't release the power back to the legislature shall convene on the 90th day. That's what it says. So why would what does shall mean? The people are ordering the legislature to convene. And why are they ordering the legislature to convene? To take back the power, to get us out of a dictatorship government and and back to a Republican or a representative government. So on the 90th day, the legislatures were supposed to come together, which was June 23rd, because he hadn't released that power. They were supposed to come together, and they have the power to do what they call a joint resolution between the House and the Senate and end the order. They don't need to get the governor's signature. They just have to pass it to the House and the Senate, and they end the order. Well, so we informed all the legislature of this law. Certified letter, we went and got multiple legal opinions about this to make sure that we were right. We notified them, and how many showed up at the Capitol building on June 23rd? 15 of them. It wasn't enough to make a quorum. So then, we were frustrated, we were concerned. Those 15 did make a proclamation of why they were there, what they felt was done. I think they acted appropriately, but they didn't have power to end the order. So then, and I got to back up a little bit. Why didn't the other legislatures show up? Because the governor's attorney in the governor's office said that you can't convene legislature unless I tell you to. And most of the legislatures believed it. Imagine that. You've got the executive branch telling that they're equal branches of government. The legislative has the power to end the governor's, the executive branch's orders, right? But they have to convene in order to do it. And then you've got the governor and his attorney saying that the legislatures don't have power to convene unless the governor says. How much does that make sense? But no matter what we said to the legislature, they still said we have to have the governor's permission. We have to have his permission. Which clearly is not the case. But then, so we could see they weren't going to come together and do that. And they started telling us, well, wait till the 2021 legislative session, we're going to take care of it all. Okay? Well, the problem with that is we had to wait 9 months under a dictatorship. And I have a problem with that, but there was nothing we could do, so we just settled down and just do what we can do. And then the 2021 legislative session comes around, and the House begins to propose a joint resolution. They begin to get some momentum. It has to go through the House first and then through the Senate. And about halfway through that, Governor Little sees it as getting momentum, and he gets all the House of Representatives together. Gets them all together in a room. And he says, if you pass this joint resolution and end the order, then we're not going to get all the rest of the federal funds that are going to be coming. And Idaho will be at a disadvantage. And there's all this money that's going to go somewhere anyway, and we won't get it. And then the people of Idaho will suffer. And these are the things that he said to them. So what did the House of Representatives do? They just stopped the process. And still today now, going on almost 2 years, we have been under these executive emergency orders. And it's put us, the people of Idaho, to the point where you realize that right now what we're doing is in a violation to those things. He could literally, legally, I wouldn't say lawfully, but legally, send his Idaho State Police Army coming here and arrest us for doing what we're doing right now. He could do that. That's the situation that we are in right now as the people of Idaho, because our government is not in proper order. So I asked the question, and I want to spend the remainder of the time here, and hopefully we can go for a half an hour or so. I want to ask you, what are the people of Idaho to do? What are we going to do?
Get rid of them.
Okay, so that's a pretty good, get rid of him.
Why do we have to wait until the election to do that?
Yeah.
Who asked that? Okay, great question. And then I'll get you right here, I forgot. So why do we have to wait until the election to do that? Well, so what are you proposing? I think that's a great question, but do we have a mechanism?
Can you recall?
What's that?
We have to
But how do we do that?
I have no idea.
Okay, I mean, I agree with you. Right here, he says recall. There was a recall effort. I will say that recall in Idaho, the way it is written, is mathematically impossible. You mathematically can't, you have to get, because you have to do it in 75 days, and it's based off of, votes and registered voters. And so right now, when they tried it, they had to get 3,800 signatures a day in order to recall the governor. It's mathematically almost impossible. Something that really needs to be changed, right? Because that is a mechanism to get rid of a bad governor. But they made it so, they changed it and made it so it's almost impossible. So,
Okay, how do we get rid of them?
The people need to stand up, start writing letters to their representatives and complain. Well, we do, but nobody has to.
so in 2020, there was thousands of letters that went to our representatives, thousands of letters. And explaining the situation, and they did not do anything. And now, they've had 4 legislative sessions since then. They could have done it they're in one right now. They have not ended the order. We are in the middle of a legislative session right now. And they're not even talking about doing anything like ending the emergency orders. So I don't think, I understand that's the thought. Well, man, if the squeaky wheel gets the grease, the parable of the unjust judge, right? But we've done that, and they have refused. Now, maybe if there was enough of us, but we assembled quite a large group of people. The People's Rights Organization, now, not just in Idaho, but there's 64,000 people in it now. And so, okay, what other thoughts?
Disobedience, don't pay no attention to the bastards.
Whoa, I like that. So, just ignore them?
Yeah.
Okay.
I never quit going out of my house, I never quit going to work, I never quit going to the grocery store. The only thing I quit doing is going anywhere that they were enforcing a mask policy.
Yeah, that's exactly what I did and what probably most everybody in this room did, right? Now, I want to point out, because you bring up a very, very important aspect to holding government accountable. Because we were watching what Governor Little was doing very closely, from 2020, in 2020. Because other governors started to do, emergency orders and stay at home lockdowns and all of that. And we were watching, for example, like Governor Inslee out of Washington. And we noticed that what happened was everything Governor Inslee did, just a few days later, Governor Little would do. And, they would, and so was California, and all these governors across. It's almost like they were all on the same, same chat or whatever. They were all communicating. And Governor Little was no exception. In fact, in some ways, he was leading. He was the first governor to ban the use of hydroxychloroquine in any of the states. He did that on March 19th, 2020. And so, but anyhow, we were seeing these. But has anybody been to Washington lately? Has anybody been to California? What's it like in Washington? Like if you go into public or you do anything? Okay.
I had some stuff to do, I bought a dog from northern Idaho, I met her in Spokane, at the airport. She said, I hate going to Spokane, I hate going to Washington. I said, why? She said, well, everybody has to wear a mask, it's just mask up,
Yeah.
There's too many rules and regulations and stuff like that.
Right now, Washington is looking to pass, and it looks like it'll pass, a legislation that gives the health, what do they call it? The health, a health official, the authority to quarantine someone on the spot and put them in a quarantine center for up to 30 days. That can be extended. That's the level they're going at. And They could do it on the spot. They could go into a restaurant and say, look, I think you might have COVID or you might be sick for some reason, and they can call in the police, that they give them authority to come and take that person and take them to a quarantine center. That's what they're doing right now. California, right there with them, Oregon. Okay, but the thing is, the point I want to make is that Governor Little's orders are almost the exact same as all these others' orders. And what he did, taking this authority, is the same thing what the other governors did. But why is it so much different? Why is life so much different in Idaho? Because the people said no. And that's why we're free. It's not because Governor Little didn't try. It's not because he didn't legally put those powers in place. It's because the people of Idaho said, that's not yours to do. They're answering that question. And I imagine Little's pretty frustrated about it. But he still worked his way to get $18 billion plus and take all these powers. So here we are. But yeah, you're right. You're exactly right. How do we remain free under these conditions? We do not comply. And when someone comes to, I got you, when someone comes to take or hurt or threaten rights of an individual because they won't comply, then their neighbors need to come around them and do the same thing that happened at the Bundy Ranch. And that's the pattern that we need to follow to be free. Yeah.
Well, along with what Washington's doing, Little also passed a law saying that the state of Idaho can take your kids, and they don't have to tell you when they're bringing them back or where they're taking them.
So I wish I had the time to go through the evidence to show you exactly what he has done. This is not all he has done. He has done some terrible, terrible things, including claiming through the suspension of the Idaho statutes and the Idaho administrative rules, claiming that the state can come take your child for whatever reason and house them in conditions that are far worse than the way they were. They suspended all those condition rules, and they don't have to tell the parents where they're at, what they're doing with them. They suspended the right for the parents to appeal when they take the child, or if they move the child, or even to know where the child is at. They suspended all of those parental rights. And you have to ask the question, why would he do such a thing? But again, he has put the people of Idaho in a very precarious situation. So I want to just, the hope, right, is, and why we must be hopeful in Idaho. I forgot, I haven't forgotten. Let me make this statement, then I'll get to it. Why we must be hopeful in Idaho is because of what this man said right here. Because the people of Idaho have shown over and over again that they're not going to comply. And that is what's keeping us free. Now, eventually they will continue to ratchet these things down to where they start using more force. Yeah, or ratcheting them up. That's ratcheting them up. Yeah. Well, I don't know. We'll see. But I say we don't take a chance and we get rid of him. I say we replace him and begin to use the state's resources to protect the people's rights rather than infringe upon them. I say we get rid of this cabal, this good old boy system that's been controlling Idaho for the last four decades or more. Get rid of it and clean our own house and become a refuge of people who want to worship how they want to worship. Trade how they want to trade. Do with their property what they want to do with it. Actually start putting forth freedom.
Where's our third branch of co-equal government at and the Constitution? You haven't even touched on that yet. They just said.
I did a little bit.
You're sitting on your thumbs?
I did a little bit.
Yeah.
They suspended the right to jury trial.
Well, yeah, but we have a Supreme Court in Idaho for the Idaho state constitution.
I know, and they're the ones that declared that jury trials are suspended in Idaho.
How about declaring that the governor has broke the Constitution how many times?
Well,
He should be fired.
yeah, he should be, and I certainly think that that is probably something that the Supreme Court should do. I don't know if they had the case in front of them to do it or not.
They won't take it.
Yeah, they might not. I actually have a case going to the Supreme Court. You remember I was arrested at the Capitol building? And, I was arrested at the Capitol building. So during this whole process, and why was I arrested? Every officer in my trial testified that I had broke no rule and was not disrupting anybody. But they arrested me. I spent up pretty close to 65 hours in Ada County Jail over it. And I was arrested multiple times because I was shining the light on this stuff right now. I was explaining it to the legislature, the people were coming, and the governor wanted to pass an immunity bill. He wanted to pass a bill, and he tried to do it in August of 2020, if you remember, that would make him legally immune to all of his COVID decisions. So that if anybody tried to bring up a case in court, that the Supreme Court or the court would have to throw it out. Because he tried to pass that law. And I made such a stink about it, and they said, hey, we gotta stop this guy. We gotta stop him from shining the light on what's going on. And so they do what they big bullies do, and they arrested me and threw me in prison. Threw me in jail. And I have this case now that's going to the Supreme Court over that matter. So we'll see. I'm not really hopeful because Supreme Court suspended jury trials. What is it going to be 4 years before I finally get there? I don't know. It's already been a year. So that's the way it's supposed to work. Yeah, they're supposed to check and balance each other. But we're not getting it from the legislature or the judicial branches of government, and the executive branch is out of control. The bureaucracies are out of control.
So I like what you're saying, and I agree with you. Let's say you get in there, what are you gonna do with the Boise Swamp? Only 15 legislatures appeared. How are you gonna change anything? I think it's a disaster over there, and you've been invaded.
Yeah.
What can you actually do?
So first of all, the governor, that's a great question. What am I gonna do? What can I do? The governor is still, at least in figure, as a figurehead, over the executive bureaucracies. And almost all of the usurpations and abuses of the people's rights are happening in the executive bureaucracies. And the governor has power to hire and fire. The governor has power to, create agencies or dissolve agencies. The governor has a tremendous amount of power. He is the executive over the executive bureaucracies. So, let's say the legislature, let's say I can't work with the legislature, which I believe I can, but let's just say that no one will work with me, they're just all mad, whatever, which is not the case, and I want to talk about that. But let's say that is the case. I could spend 4 to 8 years in the office of governor, and all I did is work on diminishing the powers of the executive bureaucracies, stripping them, getting the right people in place, minimizing them, even eliminating many of them. I could do that and do the people of Idaho a tremendous amount of good and never ever even talk to a legislator. That is the power that the governor has. And so there's a tremendous amount of good that can be done just by focusing on the abuses and the usurpation of powers in the executive branch, as the governor should do. If you're the CEO of a company and that company is out of sorts, isn't it your duty to get it back into sorts? And that is why we elect a governor. So now, the second part of it, the legislature more than anything needs leadership. They need leadership. They need a vision. They need to be able to see the right path that we can take to get some of these things right. They need to be empowered and understand that they're the ones that are supposed to be administrating the funds of Idaho, not the governor. That they have power to assemble and correct things according to their own power. They don't have to wait for the governor. They need a vision. They need leadership. And I believe that I can provide that. Can I get everything I want done? Can I eliminate property tax? Yes. I believe I can do that. Can I fight this battle to get our lands back so that Idaho is in control of its lands and resources? Yes, I believe I can do that. Can I stop abortion in Idaho? Both through executive order and through the legislature? Yes, I believe I can do that. Can I do everything that I want to do? Probably not. So, more than anything, our legislature needs leadership. And I'm going to do the best I can to provide that. And to give a vision, to work with them, and to hopefully be able to unite them enough that we can start correcting some of these things that are going on in Idaho. Great question. Okay, right here and then right here.
What's your thoughts on getting those two federal senators, or don't give a crap about Idaho, back under our control?
I think one of them's named Crapo.
I snowblowed his mom's driveway. He used to be a nice guy, and now he's a worthless piece of crap.
Well, it seems like the longer they're in this thing, they get more lost,
Absolutely.
and they don't have God as their leader, and they're looking at other things. You know, when you get to eat fancy dinners and lunches and stuff in fancy offices, you tend to forget about the people that put you there.
Yeah, when you walk the halls of the marble halls of Washington, D.C.
Yeah, you forget.
Yeah, I don't want to ever experience the pressure that they receive from inside Washington, D.C. But thank you, Mindy. But I'm going to be honest with you with an answer. I mean, hopefully you felt that I've been honest and open with you with all the answers that I've given you. And if not, please take up issue with me. You can do it in open with everybody. But so I have serious doubts if Washington, D.C. is ever going to return back to the people. Serious doubts. Which means that even more than ever, the state needs to be in an effort of protecting the people's rights, the people of Idaho, because I don't believe that Washington is going to return back to the people. And that might be a statement, and I hope that I'm wrong. I just cannot see, and nowhere ever in history has the people gone so far and ever returned. But I do have hope for states. I do have hope for states even uniting. And I do have hope for people in a state like Idaho. And one thing I know for certain, we must not lose these liberties that we have. We can't. We cannot pass this on to our children. We can't. We must not lose this precious liberty that we have. I have experienced the ultimate loss of liberty. And it is something that you never want to experience. You never want to experience that. We do not want to get into a situation where we are just people that are just constantly acted upon, where we don't have the freedoms to open businesses and trade with each other, to worship and go to church, to be able to travel and to be able to live where we want to live. We do not want to become those people. But it is a reality, and it will be lost if we do not stand to defend. It will be. And the state is designed to secure those liberties. And it is the number one reason why I'm running as governor. So thank you for that question. Right back here. You made a statement, but you raised your hand, did you?
He kind of answered.
Okay, okay. So, how are you feeling? I mean, we shouldn't feel, I know that I've put quite a bit of heaviness on you, if you will, but we should be very, very happy where we're living and who we're living with and who we're living among. That should bring us a lot of hope. And if we can get in control of the state of Idaho and begin to use that mechanism to secure our liberties, then, I mean, that's even much, I mean, that's needed, and it's something that even protects and secures our liberties even further. And so, that's why I'm here. That's what I'm doing. That's why I'm traveling around everywhere. What's that?
I'm glad I came because it's very educational.
I'm glad to hear you say that. And, okay, right here and then right here.
I wanted to ask about our voting. How is Idaho, did he make a bunch of orders to change the way we vote?
He hasn't changed other than the ability, he suspended the ability for people to keep a close eye on the polls. And he's done that by saying that, well, a couple things, you know, they have to wear masks. You know, the pollers have to wear masks. But most of the local polling places make their own rules and follow their own procedures. Most of your local communities, but there is certainly a concern there. A lot of people are concerned about the integrity of the vote, you know, or the elections, I should say, the integrity of the elections, and that's a concern for people, and we're being proactive in that. And I talked to the Secretary of State, and he says everything's okay, so. All right, right here and then right here, and then I better wrap up.
You know, the road to the governorship is probably long and hard and rough and all that. How do we get you on the ballot versus the current governor?
Well, right now, the way we have and the direction we're going, all three of us will be on the ballot. So when I say all three, I guess there's a whole bunch. There's like a whole list of them, right? But Governor Little will be on the ballot, Lieutenant Governor will be on the ballot, and I will be on the ballot. It's in the Republican primary, which is in May. You know, that's where we're at. The people of Idaho get to choose who they want at that point to move forward into the generals. That's what the people get to choose, and that's what I'm doing here.
Not to take away from you or the seat you're running from, but people really need to get out and vote for their local sheriff, because he's the man with the power. You ban all our sheriffs together, we can change the governor's mind pretty fast.
And that has happened, right? When you're sheriff, who is the chief law enforcement officer in the county, above any other entity, even federal, he's the chief law enforcement officer. When he says you're not gonna enforce these things in this county, that's the way it is. And so, a sheriff is absolutely crucial for the state mechanism to secure liberty, right? The most needed mechanism is the individual acting in defense of their own liberties, right? But when it comes to the state mechanisms, you have a sheriff who plays a crucial role in that. And in fact, you know, governor and sheriffs are the most important positions that we need to fill with the right people right now, for sure.
You haven't said anything about your other opponent,
Which one?
Lieutenant Governor.
Oh, Janice McGee.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, what should I say about her?
I have my opinion. What's yours?
Well, I mean, I think she's nice. I think Brad Little's nice too. I don't think he's a good person. Well, I shouldn't say that. I don't like any of his policies, right? I can assume that he's, I don't want to judge whether he's, where his salvation is or anything like that, but I don't like what he's doing. But everybody says he's a nice person. And everybody says Janice is a nice person. And I have my questions about Janice in the sense that I don't understand why she occupied the office of Lieutenant Governor and did nothing all the way through 2020, and really even made no noise until she announced that she was gonna run as governor, and then all of a sudden she does some things that really don't have any impact on the people of Idaho, like her political gimmick when Governor left the state. We need action, and we need things that are actually going to secure the rights and the liberties of the people of Idaho. We don't need political gimmicks that make people look good and get people to think that they might be for securing liberty. And so, I mean, just generally, I'll just leave it there. So yeah, right here.
Could you touch real quick on your public education voucher model?
Yeah, so we have some challenges in education, public education. So I'm gonna, first of all, right off the bat, give you my belief about public education. It doesn't work, and I don't think the state should be in it, in the education business. But we are. We're heavily into it. In fact, I'll show you something here. I might, this is just the state. This is not talking about your property tax. This is just how the state spends its money. So almost 40% goes to welfare, human and health services. And then you got another almost 35% that goes to education. Now this is on top of all the property tax money. This is on top of that. So we're spending billions and billions of dollars in education. But and we're not doing very well. And there's evidence that basically the state is failing in the ability to educate or to assist in educating. So I believe that when it comes to public education, that free market principles need to be applied. And that needs to happen in two ways. One is the teachers and the local administrators and the local school boards need to be free from federal and state curriculums. They need to be freed up from that. They need to be free to be able to decide how and what they're going to teach and educate the children. They need to be free, and it's very important because the other side is the parents need to determine where the funds, how the funds go, where they go. And they determine that by deciding where their children go. So if their children go to this school, well, the allotted amount for that student goes to that school. Now, because right now, if you take your child out of school, let's say 50% of the community takes their children out of the public school in that community, that school only receives a 3% decrease in budget the next year. So there is no accountability for parents taking their children out of school. There is no accountability. That's why you go to the school boards and the school administrators and they just don't care what parents say, because there is no accountability. So we have to create a free market situation where the teachers and the administrators can teach what they decide, and then you have to get the parents influencing that, right, and holding them accountable. Because I'll give you a little bit of an analogy. Right now in our school system, it's like you have, let's say 10 hamburger shops in town, right? But they all have to buy the hamburger from the same place. They have to buy the buns and the condiments. They have to make it the same way. They have to charge the same price. They have to pay their employees the same way. They have to build their buildings the same way. And they have to serve it the same way. Well, what kind of hamburger are you going to get?
Same.
It's going to be the same hamburger. It's probably not going to be that great a one, right? So, but if you free them up, so that's just like us, holding and controlling the schools. Right? If you give them freedom to be able to teach as they want, and then the customer gets to decide what kind of hamburger they want. If you do that and a school begins to teach something like critical race theory, and the parents are like, they start taking their kids out of school because of that, guess what happens to the school? They immediately correct it. Right? And you also have a situation where some schools will focus on this topic, and certain students and parents will want to go to that school. Others, they'll start competing in that way to actually give a socialist system of public education a chance. And the reason why you give it a chance is because you apply free market principles. And if we're going to have a public education system under the umbrella of government and spend this kind of money, so it's about double this when you're talking about the property tax, implications. When you're going to spend $6 to $7 billion a year, then I think we must give it a chance by applying some free market principles. And that's basically my solution and what I propose in my Keep Idaho plan to help schools. Good question. Yeah. So I'm willing to answer questions as long as you want, but I think we will probably need to wrap it up here pretty soon. Right here.
I just want to say, I think your message resonates well with us here in rural Idaho. How do you think you're going to do in places like Falls, Tampa, Meridian, Boise?
So, one thing that we have experienced many, many times is people come in skeptical and they leave supporters. So we see. Well, Emmett's about 45 minutes from Boise, and during all of this stuff, I spent a lot of time over there. So I've had a lot of personal interaction with the people in the cities, in Boise area. And actually, I poll very well there. Now, Eastern Idaho is a challenge. I got to spend a ton of time. But basically, I'm on a foot race to try to get in front of as many people as I can to express, who I am and what Idaho is going through, so that people can experience that I'm not what MSN says I am. And then they gain confidence and begin to support. That's the game. If I can do it in a manner in which I can get in front of enough people, will I win the race? If I can't, then I lose. And it really is that simple to us. It's just hard doing it. That's why every single night I'm meeting with groups like this. Every single night. And we're seeing them, our groups get larger and larger and larger. I mean, so anyway, did that answer your question?
Yeah, I did.
Okay. So right here and then right here, and then I'll try to wrap this up.
I'm all for eliminating the state tax. That's grand in my opinion. But along with that, how are you gonna fund what gets funded off of that?
So what you're saying is that, because you're talking about the elimination of property tax, right? And then your concern is how do we fund the legitimate purposes of government, like our sheriff, right? And how does our sheriff get funded if we eliminate property tax? Because that's how he gets funded, right? And that's a concern. So I'm going to go through this, but what is the problem with property tax right now? What's the problem with it? And I haven't forgot that I got a question here. What's the problem?
It's basically saying the government owns what you own and then paying them to have it.
You never own your property. Never. You have to pay until the day you die. And then if your kids don't pay it that next year, they lose it. And so it is the state's way of deifying itself and saying that it owns everything. And it is a problem. And in fact, kind of to emphasize that, Karl Marx, the founder of communism, said that communism can be summed up into one sentence: the abolition of private property. And this is a way in which the state abolishes private property, because ownership is the control of. And if you lose the ability to control it, you don't truly own it. And if the state has the power to take it because you don't pay them, then you don't own it. So it is extremely important in order to uphold the right to own and control property, to change the way in which our legitimate purposes of government are funded, to eliminate property tax. And I'm proposing that, so let me go down through this. So I'm proposing that we replace the current property tax system, replace it with a consumption tax. And I'll go through this really quickly with you. And then I got one more question right back there, and I'll answer that, and then I'll wrap this up. Okay, so our current system, the average home right now in Idaho is a little above $400,000. I know, in the cities, it's $550,000 for an average home in the city. Imagine that. There's a whole lot of problems there. We can talk about that we have an affordable housing crisis that's going to be detrimental to our children if we don't correct it. But I don't have time to address that. So let's take this average home of $400,000. And so the property owner would pay every year on this home $2,000 to $3,000 in property tax a year. And that would be, in a 30-year period, the state would collect $60,000 to $90,000 a year. Okay? Or excuse me. Thank you for correcting me. Collect, in a 30-year period, $60,000 to $90,000. So the reason I say 30-year period is because that's about the length of a mortgage, right? So now, I have some math I got to correct on this one, but I'll correct it here. So I want to replace it on consumption tax. So let's take that same $400,000 home, and let's say that we, at the time of sale, so the tax would be due at the time of the purchase, actually. At the time of purchase, 5%. Let's say 5% would be due at the time of purchase. So the home, let's say a $400,000 home, it would be due, $20,000 would be due at the time it was purchased. And that $20,000 could either be paid off or it could be rolled into the mortgage. Okay? But the point is the state gets its money at the very beginning of the purchase, the very beginning. And no longer does the person owe the state, and no longer does the state have any interest in it. Well, you might be saying, well, $20,000 is a far cry from $60,000 to $90,000, right? Well, you have to calculate that the average home sells 3 to 5 times in a 30-year period. So therefore, the tax that's collected on that same home through a consumption tax is actually $60,000 to $100,000. So it's more than enough. It replaces the property tax. Does everybody follow that? But what's the difference? Once the mortgage is paid off, once you've paid that off at the beginning of the sale, either through a mortgage or you just pay it off, you own your home. No longer does the state have interest in it. You own it. And so it pays for the legitimate purposes of government, but it also protects the right to private property. And I believe that we need to take our property tax system and crumble up an old ball and get rid of it and replace it. Now, there's some graduation period, some period of time where we have to move into that, and I've addressed that in other places. Like if you go to my website, goldbundy.com, I've addressed that. So any questions on there? Does everybody understand what I'm proposing in replace of property tax? All right, I got a question here, and then I gotta wrap up, but I'll give you a chance to make a comment right back here.
I just want to know where you go to look for facts. Like if I want to get more educated in the government system and in the Idaho statutes, where do I go to find information?
Well, it's not easy because it's not just offered to you at one place, you know. It's a really good question because I do a lot of it and it takes a ton of time. And also I'm connected, so I think you have to start with what they've done. Like start with what they've done and compare it to what the law says, what the Constitution says, and that'll probably take you down a rabbit hole that you'll learn a ton. But it'll start to open your eyes up. But I would start with what they're doing or what they've done, and then compare it to the Constitution, the Idaho statutes, and let it go from there.
Do you have links on your site that people can?
I do. In fact, if you go to my website, votebundy.com, and you go to events and go to virtual town halls, I've done 4 virtual town halls, and I've addressed quite a few things. I mean, I go through them, just like I do here, but it's virtual, and it's recorded and documented. And you can go through that stuff on your own time. You can send that to your friends, and then also we record this and we'll upload this and put it on our news, and it'll go to it'll say more town hall or more town hall, and you could click on that and this video will be in there, and then you could share that with your friends and say, hey, this is what he said there. And most of our other town halls and convocations and meet and greets are also in there. And so that's how you can get the information that I have been able to find. We keep exposing. We're ramping up now to do a full campaign to expose these things and give the people of Idaho a chance to make a decision, because it's hard to make a decision when you don't. And that's what I'm doing. That's why I need your support. That's why I need you to fund what we're doing. That's why I need you to share our stuff with your neighbors. That's why I need you to subscribe. Because if you subscribe to my email list, then I will be sending this stuff out. You'll be more informed, and you could, in return, send it to your friends and keep this going. So, you had a comment?
Yeah, on your 5% due at sale, so I just was curious, who's responsible for that, the buyer or the seller?
The buyer.
The buyer.
The buyer, correct.
So the buyer could negotiate that with the seller anyway, huh?
Well, it would, the
But he has to pay.
5% right here would be a legislative decision, and it could be anywhere from 2 to 5%, right? But no, it wouldn't be negotiable with the seller or the buyer. That's just the tax.
You'd have to talk the buyer or the seller into talking it down.
Yeah, you could certainly. Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, absolutely. That could be a leveraging point. Absolutely. So, just going to wrap up here, and hopefully I've emphasized to you the importance of where Idaho is at and how important it is that we get these things right, to make sure that we do not pass on what is happening in our nation and in our state to our children. And I do need your help, and I've got a friend here who's going to advocate for me a little bit and ask you for some help. Come on up. And I hope you listen to him and do what you can do.
That sounds good. Okay. This is the tougher part. So I'll just start off by just introducing myself and my wife. My wife grew up here in Moore, Idaho, and I grabbed her and took her to Preston, Napoleon Dynamiteville. And even though I sound like a local kid, I love Idaho, we live in Idaho, but I was born and raised in Europe. And I will rephrase that, I will say socialist Europe. And I have friends that grew up in Cuba, Venezuela, Russia, and other parts of Europe. And for a couple of years ago, I got my citizenship here. And I'm very, very glad, because this is the greatest country on earth. And Idaho is the greatest state in this country, okay? And there's many, many reasons for that. The friends that I'm talking about that grew up in socialist, communist countries, all of us will tell you the same thing. We have seen socialism creeping into this country for many, many years. And right now, it feels like it's coming on full force at high speed. I call it communism. I remember years ago when my wife and I traveled through Europe. I own a consulting firm, so I do some work for the government and the military, in the corporate world, some consulting jobs. And I have met with a lot of people, and they would ask me, oh, how's your president when Obama was in? You know what my answer was? I would tell them he's a communist dictator. And that would offend my friends in Europe, unfortunately. But that's how I felt. That's how strongly I felt. But equally as strong, I feel that if you value Christian and constitutional principles and teachings, I have never met anybody that comes closer to that than Ammon Bundy. We've only met Ammon a handful of times, and every time we've been with him and we understand and we learn more about him, he embodies those values better than anybody. So now, I know there's a lot of people that might be frustrated with what's going on in the country and in the state, and so am I. So I'm going to give you two things that we need to do to make a difference, okay? One, obviously, is to vote. Statistically, about 30% of Republicans show up to vote. About 80% of the Democrats show up to vote. So we've got some work to do, okay? And then number two, like Ammon alluded to, is money. The other guys have pretty big budgets. And so you can go to votebundy.com. You can sign up over there to donate. There's some donation envelopes on the back. But I want to come back to the other thing. And the other thing that we really, really need to do, and that is to talk. Okay? And I know for some guys, that might be a little bit difficult. But if you have a thing called a wife, that will typically cure that very, very quickly. So I would invite you, because things are very, very critical in terms of how serious things are in this country right now. I would invite you, seriously invite you, to please consider talking to friends, family, whoever you might know. Get them out to vote. Get them out to votebundy.com. Because I know people that have told me personally that I would never support Ammon Bundy, but as soon as they came and met him, saw a virtual town hall, they are now 100% behind him. So two things: funding, voting, and talking to your wife so that she'll talk to other people. Okay? Thank you.
All right, let's wrap this up. We could probably end. You want to end with a closing prayer? Let's do that. Who would like to offer that? Any volunteer? Don't be shy. Took off your hat. Come on up. Unless you want to
Can I
go.
do it from here?
You can do it from there.
Father in heaven, we come before you this night with great humility, and you know our concern. We just ask, Father God, that you instill in us the enthusiasm that Emma has shown tonight for this great country of ours. We know as things get worse, Father God, we will have even less respect from our fellow citizens who in many cases are now. So we just ask that you instill within us this desire to see things improve. We ask that you bless Ammon and his whole campaign and all those and working with that, Lord. You would lift them and that you would see a successful outcome. And we pray this prayer